Hi everyone, Dr. Samantha Cutrara here, the Principal Storytelling Officer for the HighWater Source Story video series. Betty is here too, as you can see. This is a bonus video today because earlier in the week we talked to Richard Van Camp, who is an Indigenous author who wrote Blanket of Butterflies, which we talked about. He wrote a story in this place, which we talked about. And when I asked him about the illustrations of it, he's like, just talk to Scott. Scott's amazing. And so we're talking to Scott because Scott's amazing. So hi, Scott. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name's Scott D. Henderson. I am a freelance illustrator, and I've worked on nearly 24 graphic novels with Richard Van Camp, as well as several other Indigenous and Métis authors, as well as branching out into some of the other. Spent the last 10 plus years working with and helping, in particular, a lot of Indigenous authors tell their stories. In my case, my role is to make pretty pictures out of them and make the stories make sense.
Yeah, because I mean, with graphic works, with comic books, graphic novels, like I can only imagine that the artist and the storyteller, like the author, have to work so closely together, which is why it was really great that Richard was just like, oh, like this piece, like just go to the artist himself, right? Like it's so interesting, that collaboration.
I mean, yeah, with all the authors I usually work very closely. I mean, it's especially important for me to work closely with the author, just because me being a non-Indigenous person, helping to tell stories of an Indigenous, Métis, whatnot, person, I have to be as knowledgeable, but also not put too much of myself into it, sort of thing, because it is ultimately their story and I don't want to overwrite it, as it were.
Well, it's interesting because when we set this up and I was like, I feel like I've seen his work before. And then I went to my bookshelf, like that shelf right there is all graphic novels. And I was like, oh, this is Scott. And this is Scott. And this is Scott. And this is Scott. And a whole bunch of works from Tales of the Big City. And that's Scott. It's so interesting that you're so integrated in telling these stories, these Indigenous stories, these Métis stories. What is it like as a non-Indigenous person that are telling these stories that aren't necessarily ancestral to you?
I really enjoy telling the stories, and all the authors I've always enjoyed working with, and they all have their different styles for writing. But I've always enjoyed the stories. Admittedly, and unfortunately, I really don't know a lot of the history and whatnot of a lot of stories that I work on, especially when I was first starting out. Didn't know about residential schools. I didn't know about Métis history, even though I'm in Manitoba. I don't know whether that was a failing of the school system or just my daydreaming tendencies during class, sorry. I sort of unfortunately want to say the former, but I can't discount my own daydreaming. But for a number of years, I've just been really interested in just learning about different cultures and just their history, their interaction, just how humans get along, and that sort of thing, or don't get along. And so rather than looking at it from just a generalized outsider looking in and just in a generalized way, I have this opportunity to get much more personalized experiences and perspectives on it, from the ground, as it were, or from the source, or closer to the source, and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's always been, I mean, I for many years always enjoyed that. So it's just, that is what helped allow me to make these connections and get these jobs and continue to work on them.
Well, I do think that, your daydreaming aside, I do think that there has been a gap in the educational system for a very, very long time in telling these stories. And that's why I'm also non-Indigenous. And that's why, for me, identifying both sources and stories to be able to bring these different understandings of the Canadian past out are so valuable. And to have it in comic book or graphic novel form, I think is so engaging for young people. And when you say like that you're interested in cultures generally, I think of this kind of 2-page spread that Richard was talking about, and maybe we'll go over to screen share and we can talk about it while we have it up. I don't have a colored version. So when she sent this to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so amazing in color.
Yeah, Donovan Yashik is the colorist. As always, he did a fabulous job.
Yeah, it's just amazing. So here is really an interesting blend of cultures, because on one hand, it's this story about Dene laws and about elders and about like Japanese samurai warriors. And then we have this action sequence that could come out of so many like modern superhero martial arts type things. Like, and he mentioned this one in particular because he had so much dialogue, and he said that you reimagined it. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about this spread and your process for it?
Well, I, in all honesty, I don't remember there being a lot of dialogue, but I did when I got the script for this, I just really imagined this not just as simply like 2-3 panels of a few punches, kicks, fight sort of thing, but just the way that I envisioned it. It was very much inspired by another comic artist, Travis Charest, in a book that he did where there was a fight, not quite as, but it wasn't like a 2-page spread, but it was sort of like this, where there was a few moment to moment, almost sort of shots of the action sequence, and so I just expanded that to their full fight. I don't know, just like the idea of showing all those little details. I'm very detail. I like a lot of those little details, for good or bad, for the colorist who has to separate all those little details in color. But I just like showing those details and putting a spotlight on to all these different aspects, like not just like an action, but sometimes like a mood or just a little detail. It's not necessarily a plot point or anything, but it's a detail, and it just makes the whole thing richer. Yeah, so yeah, that was sort of a lot of my thinking and inspirations, and whatnot, in particular for this spread here.
Well, what I've noticed in your work, like before I knew we were going to have this conversation, like when I read Sugar Falls and when I read Betty, was the attention to detail and how emotive a lot of these like panels are. And I think when you were saying like your attention to detail, it really comes through with these emotions. Would you consider yourself like an artist who focuses on emotion in that way?
I guess I do. I like to focus on its emotion, despite whatever might be going on in my own head, or however I emote or don't emote. Sorry, distracted by the emergency vehicle traffic outside my.
It's okay. It's okay.
But the one thing that I've really learned over the years in trying to just hone my craft and just be better artist is just being able to capture. There's so many details that you can capture to just, once again, make the story richer. And so being able to capture those emotions and those little gestures really goes a long way, regardless of whether it's somewhat more realistic art style like I do, or if it's a little bit more stylized, more quote unquote cartoony, or anything else in between sort of thing. I think those details and pulling up those things from real lived experiences and whatnot, just make the story more relatable and everything, both visually as well as in terms of dialogue and script and plot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I ask about emotion is because one of the things that seem to come up a lot when we are doing these conversations is like the presence of emotion in history and how we need to bring that into the classroom, and the importance of using historical imagination. And that is often kind of infusing an affect and emotion to these stories. And that's why being able to see the ways that you're interpreting it is so interesting. When we showed that two panel, the fighting panel, you were like, I just kind of envisioned it like this. Is that your process usually when you are working with an author?
Yeah, like what I do is I get the script and I read through it. Authors like Richard Van Camp or Katerina Vermette, they have a little bit more of an open script, we'll say, that leaves a lot more imagination or puts a little bit more of the work on my plate in terms of how to pace it and visualize it and that sort of thing. Versus, say, David Robertson, who has a much more detailed script. Like his scripts are more like a movie script, and he also visualizes that way. Like you can't draw, sorry, David, but you can, and that's okay. That's why I'm here. But he does write, and he imagines the things as if it was like a movie and in working with him, in his case, the way he visualized it is actually also very similar to the way that I would visualize the same scene. So that's why he and I, for certain, always work together really, really well. There isn't like, oh, you're saying it this way, but I think it should be better this way. I occasionally have those ideas, but for the most part, we're like, nope, this is good. I'll just go that way. So I will read over the script, and then at least probably a couple times, and then the second, third, and so forth times, that's when I'm starting to I sort of do some of the work in my head, just almost imagining it like a movie. And then I start putting some of those ideas down into just a simple little sketch that to break it down into sort of little panels like this. And then I might start drawing, okay, well, then that's the Northern Life Museum, and then I'll start doing some research, seeing if I can find pictures of that Northern Life Museum. Some things are easier to find than others, and things in Northwest Territories are a little bit trickier to find, in all honesty. And then, I'm going to have a picture of that samurai armor. They're going to showcase that. Then we're going to have that boy Sonny. He's looking there, but he's looking a little bit scared. So let's just start breaking it down like that. And actually my sketches are even more detailed. Yeah, I was going off of my memory as to how the story progressed. Actually, it's like, no, there's something missing in the way that I did that.
I was like, I know what you're drawing. I've seen that before. Yeah.
And actually my thumbnails, my little sketches are even more detailed in my scribbles here, as I'm just working quickly while talking, sort of thing. And I break that sort of down. Sometimes I'll come up with multiple versions. Sometimes I just have a pretty clear idea of how I want to tell the story. Like how to, it's like, well, this panel, it's an establishing shot. We need to establish where this is, regardless of what the text is going to be. So I think establishing shots usually work better as being bigger panels, or at least wider panels. So, okay, there's that. Oh, we got some armor. Well, the armor is mostly just the torso. So I ideally like a taller panel for that. Okay, now I have to figure out how to fit all these other things in there. And then depending on how shot 1 to shot 2, shot 3, shot 4, whatever, how they progress, that may mean that I have to reimagine it. But for most part, that's what my initial sketches are. After those get approved by the writer or editor, then I go into more detailed drawings, still basing off that, but then my own reference material when I make really goofy, awkward photographs of myself in the poses might influence minor little changes and that sort of thing here.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you. It's interesting that you were like, to find reference materials, because actually Richard was saying like how wonderful you are when he's provided feedback like, oh, that, that tree or that type of leaf isn't in that area. And you're like, okay, great. Like, let's make sure that it's more reflective. And that kind of collaboration is so interesting. As a way to kind of wrap up this conversation, which I really appreciate as a bonus conversation. So I gravitate really towards a lot of comic books and graphic novels to tell history because I love the illustration, I love the emotion, I love the storytelling. Do you have any advice for teachers who might want to bring these works into their classroom but think that they might not be literary enough, or bring it into their classroom as a model for an assignment or activity?
My one advice, like you sort of said, like people think, oh, it's not literally enough. I'm of the mindset these days to provide whatever inspires the kid to actually act like a springboard, I guess, if you will. Like my high school art teacher, she was amazing, and I sort of wanted to learn, or the study was to do like value drawing, pencil drawing, and getting shading and gradation, that sort of stuff. Go get a magazine, a black and white picture of a magazine, or get a family photo. And I had that. It was a baby picture of me, but I'm like, whatever. So she could tell that I wasn't really interested. It's just, okay, I'm not doing this with everybody, but you can draw like a superhero, but you have to do it realistically. And of course I did it, and I gravitated, and I went bigger than I probably should have or needed to, but I really got into it, and I still learned how to do it, but I had to do it in a slightly different way. So it doesn't have to be like, you need those sort of rules to get things started, but maybe not being set that it has to be, we have to do it this way, because that might not work for every kid. I mean, some kids might be insecure about their drawing ability, but maybe they're good at writing and vice versa. So maybe it could be a collaboration in that case. And as I said, I'm really in support of anything that ultimately supports the interest of the kid, because the more interested in, then that might lead to something to the next level, or to the next stone that just bit by bit broadens their view. And that's why I think graphic novels are great in the schools, and I'm glad that it's generally that comic books and graphic novels are being embraced in the school, that there isn't as many of those old sort of holdouts that, comic books are, unimportant and they're meaningless or not high art or whatever it might be. Because that love of that low bit of art that maybe isn't literary might be what leads you to suddenly be more interested in something that is that next level, or that sort of thing. I mean, that's basically what happened with me, but it was like Star Wars and mythology. Like, I wouldn't have been interested in mythology without Star Wars, but in the right order to then learn about Joseph Campbell, which to anthropology, which is why I'm so interested in anthropology and culture and studies and all that sort of stuff, which is leading into psychology and behavior and everything else like that. Like, I needed to have that love of the pop culture, maybe slightly meaningless thing, but it led me to all those other things. So I definitely wouldn't worry too much about whether it's literary or anything like that enough, at least in the beginning. Like, you need to just work towards it, I guess, and whatever gets you there is what's important.
Well, and this notion of meaningless is only relative. Like, if it's meaningful for the student, then it should be meaningful for the teacher. And to be able to understand how all of those different elements of students' rich lives outside the classroom can play into understanding for in this video series, a more richer understanding of Canada and who we are in this place, I think is really valuable. So what a wonderful way to end this little bonus conversation, Scott. Thank you so much. How can people find you? What's coming up, etc.?
Well, I'm on a lot of social media off and on because I shouldn't be on there because I will get drawn into it for far too long and I can't stop myself.
Is that a pun?
But I'm on Facebook. Twitter, it's at OurBoris09. Instagram, I think it's just Scott Henderson Art, all sort of one word. For upcoming projects, another book by David Robertson and myself, The Reckoner Rises, which is about Indigenous superheroes and deals with anxiety and PTSD, but also still superheroes, Indigenous kids fighting evil scientific corporations. So it's a lot of fun. The second volume just came out, Version Control. And then I do have a little piece that's in the next Marvel Voices Pride that comes out later this month on the 22nd. And there was even something with Dark Horse Comics and Jeff Lemire and his Black Hammer comic series, although I'm not certain when that's being released yet. So,
well, we'll make sure to put all of the links, requisite links that you've mentioned below so that people can find you. Thank you so much. This was just a wonderful bonus talk. I'm so glad that Richard suggested it. And let's stay in touch because I love, apparently I'm a big fan of your work. I have a whole stack that I was like, oh, well, look at that.
Awesome. I just thought of one other thing for the teachers and the advising. Maybe also, because sometimes people are like, oh, well, I can't draw that way, or I can't draw realistically or whatnot. Like, show a lot of different things, like literally stick figures, and then you got realism and everything else in between, because one of those things might be the thing that fits with them, so that the student doesn't think, oh, it has to be this way. It can be this way, this way, this way. Any of the ways, sort of thing. Yeah, because imposter syndrome is horrible.
Well, and some people just are not artistic. I mean, or not artistic, but like they can't draw very well. Like, I'm not a very good drawer, but I have very clear ideas in my head of what I want things to look like. And so when it does not look like that, when I put it down, it gets very frustrating. One activity that I did, I developed the education and exhibition program at the Archives of Ontario in 2012, 2014. And there was a Twitter project they were doing in which they tweeted out diary entries from somebody who was a participant in the War of 1812. And our workshop for that was I gave students like little cutouts of what this guy could look like, which was really just clip art. And I was like, now create the panels around him, so that they were never like thinking that they had to draw the person. And what was interesting is that the more they got into it, they'd like rip the head off and they would change the body, like they draw like a different body. And that was a really interesting way to see, like, when you took just that level of barrier down, the students were kind of into it. So I really appreciate you saying, like, show a lot of different styles of art. Yeah. So thank you again. Let's stay in touch. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.